The morning mist clung to the ancient towers of Valdoria Castle like secrets refusing to be told. Princess Elena Marchand stood at the iron gates she had not crossed in 7 years, her heart pounding against her ribs with the force of a war drum. The cobblestones beneath her feet seemed to whisper of memories she had tried so hard to bury, and the familiar scent of jasmine from the royal gardens made her stomach clench with a mixture of longing and dread. She had left this place as a naive girl of 19, fleeing in the dead of night, with nothing but a small bag and a broken heart. Now, at 26, she returned as a woman hardened by the world beyond these gilded walls, her once soft hands now calloused from years of working in distant villages, her eyes carrying shadows that spoke of struggles the pampered princess she once was could never have imagined. The massive oak doors of the castle groaned open before she could even announce herself. A figure emerged from the shadows of the great hall, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was Marcus Thorne, the head guard who had been her closest confidant during her teenage years, the man whose quiet strength had been her anchor in the turbulent waters of royal politics. His dark hair now showed streaks of silver at the temples, and his weathered face bore new lines of worry and responsibility, but his deep brown eyes still held that same unwavering loyalty that had once made her feel safe in a world of constant scheming. "Your Highness," Marcus said, his voice rougher than she remembered, as if the years had scraped against it like sandpaper. He bowed formally, but she could see his hands trembling slightly at his sides. "You've returned." Elena lifted her chin, trying to summon the regal bearing that had once come as naturally as breathing. "I am no longer your Highness, Marcus. Those days are long behind me. I'm here because—" She paused, the words sticking in her throat like thorns. "Because my father is dying, and apparently, even after everything, blood still calls to blood." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. Marcus had been there the night she left. He had been the only one who knew the real reason for her flight, the terrible secret that had shattered her world and driven her from everything she had ever known. He had kept that secret for 7 years, and now, looking into his eyes, she wondered if the weight of it had aged him as much as it had aged her. "Lady Cordelia awaits you in the blue salon," Marcus said finally, his formal tone not quite masking the warmth that crept into his voice. She has changed much since you left, Princess. The years have not been kind to her." Elena's stepmother, the woman who had married her father when Elena was just 12, bringing with her a smile as bright as sunlight and a heart that seemed to overflow with kindness. Or so Elena had believed, until that horrible night 7 years ago, when she had discovered the truth hidden beneath Cordelia's perfect facade. As they walked through the familiar corridors, Elena's eyes drank in the details she had tried so hard to forget. The portraits of her ancestors gazed down from their gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress with either approval or condemnation. The tapestries her grandmother had commissioned still hung in their appointed places, depicting scenes of Valdoria's glorious history, though she noticed several bore signs of careful repair, as if the kingdom's finances had suffered in her absence. "How is he?" Elena asked quietly as they approached the grand staircase. "My father?" Marcus's step faltered almost imperceptibly. "The physicians say it is his heart, your high." "Elena, it grows weaker by the day. He speaks of you often, especially in his more confused moments. Sometimes he forgets you ever left." A sharp pain lanced through Elena's chest. King Aldrich had been a distant father, more concerned with matters of state than with the emotional needs of his only child, but she had loved him deeply nonetheless. The thought of him lying weakened and confused in the great bed where her mother had died so many years ago made her throat constrict with unshed tears. They reached the blue salon, and Marcus paused with his hand on the ornate door handle. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There are things you need to know, things that have happened since you left. Lady Cordelia, she has become the true power behind the throne. Your father's illness has progressed further than the court physicians admit publicly. She makes most of the kingdom's decisions now, and she has allies who support her claim to influence." "What kind of allies?" Elena asked, though something cold in the pit of her stomach told her she already knew. Lord Blackwood, for one. He has grown quite close to Lady Cordelia over the years. Some say, Marcus hesitated, glancing around as if the very walls might have ears. Some say he hopes to marry her when your father passes, consolidating their power over the kingdom. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Lord Blackwood. She remembered him well, a man with pale, calculating eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. He had been one of her father's advisors even when she was a child, always lurking at the edges of important conversations, always watching, always listening. If he and Cordelia were working together now, and what of my claim to the throne? Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus's expression grew grim. Officially, you are still the heir apparent. Your father has never revoked your birthright, despite the circumstances of your departure. But Lady Cordelia has been very careful to spread certain stories about your time away. Stories that paint you as unstable, unsuitable for rule. She claims you abandoned your duties and your people in their time of need, that you cannot be trusted with the responsibility of the crown. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of her stepmother's manipulations settling around her like a shroud. Even after all these years, even with an ocean of distance between them, Cordelia's influence had continued to shape the narrative of Elena's life. She doesn't know I'm here yet, does she? Elena asked. No. I received word of your ship's arrival from my contacts in the harbor district, but I have not yet informed the court. I thought you might want some time to prepare yourself. Elena squeezed Marcus's arm gratefully. Thank you. You have always been more loyal to me than I deserved. Your Highness, Marcus said, his voice firm with conviction. You are the rightful heir to the throne of Valdoria. Whatever mistakes you may think you've made, whatever secrets you carry, that truth remains unchanged. This kingdom needs you now more than ever. Before Elena could respond, the door to the blue salon swung open from within, as if someone had been listening to their conversation. A figure stepped out, and Elena's heart stopped. Lady Cordelia Marchand stood before her, still beautiful at 45, but with a cold, calculating gleam in her green eyes that Elena didn't remember from her youth. Her golden hair was swept up in an elaborate style befitting her station, and her gown was made of the finest silk and deep emerald, the royal color of Valdoria, which as stepmother to the heir she had every right to wear, but which somehow looked wrong on her, like a costume rather than a birthright. My dear Elena, Cordelia said, her voice honey-sweet but with an undertone sharp enough to cut glass. What an unexpected surprise. Though perhaps I shouldn't be surprised. Vultures do tend to circle when they sense death approaching. Elena felt her spine straighten, her chin lift with inherited pride. 7 years in the outside world had taught her many things, but most importantly, they had taught her that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. She was no longer the broken, frightened girl who had fled in the night. Lady Cordelia, she replied coolly, not bothering to use any of the honorific titles her stepmother had claimed over the years. How good of you to greet me so warmly. I see the years have done nothing to dull your particular gift for hospitality. Cordelia's smile widened, but it never touched her eyes. Oh, my dear child, you have no idea how much I've missed your sharp tongue. The court has been positively dull without your dramatic flair for, what was it you were so fond of? Ah, yes, speaking truth to power. Though I suppose running away in the middle of the night is another form of truth-telling, isn't it? The barb hit its mark, and Elena felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of anger and shame. But she had learned to control her emotions in the harsh world beyond these walls, and she refused to give Cordelia the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. I'm here to see my father, Elena said simply. I trust you won't try to prevent me from visiting him in what may be his final days. Prevent you? Cordelia laughed, a sound like silver bells with a discordant note that made Elena's skin crawl. My dear girl, I would never dream of coming between a daughter and her dying father. Though I do hope you're prepared for what you'll find. He's not the man you remember, I'm afraid. The illness has changed him. Sometimes he doesn't recognize even me, and I've been by his side every single day for the past 7 years. Unlike some people. Elena felt Marcus tense beside her, and she knew he was restraining himself from defending her honor. She appreciated his loyalty, but this was a battle she needed to fight herself. "I'm sure your devotion has been exemplary," Elena said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Though I do wonder what my father would think if he knew about all the decisions you've been making in his name, the alliances you've been forming, the promises you've been making about the future of this kingdom." For just a moment, Cordelia's mask slipped, and Elena caught a glimpse of something dangerous flickering in those green eyes. Then the practiced smile returned, brighter than ever. "I have no idea what you mean, dear heart. I am simply a devoted wife caring for her husband in his time of need. Any influence I might have is purely that of a loving spouse, nothing more. Though I suppose after 7 years away you might have forgotten how a real family functions. The words were designed to wound, and they did." But Elena had learned to transform pain into purpose, and she felt her resolve hardening like steel in a forge. "Marcus," she said, not taking her eyes off Cordelia, "please escort me to my father's chambers. I've waited 7 years to see him. I don't intend to wait any longer." "Of course, Your Highness," Marcus replied, and Elena didn't miss the way Cordelia's jaw tightened at the use of her royal title. As they moved toward the great staircase that led to the royal quarters, Cordelia called after them, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. "Elena, darling, you should know that Lord Blackwood is arriving tomorrow for an extended stay. He's been such a comfort to your father during his illness, and I know he'll be absolutely thrilled to see you again. You two always had such interesting conversations when you were younger." Elena's steps faltered, and she felt the blood drain from her face. Lord Blackwood, the man whose secret she had stumbled upon 7 years ago, the discovery that had sent her fleeing into the night like a thief. If he was coming here, if he and Cordelia were truly working together— "Are you all right, Your Highness?" Marcus asked quietly, his hand moving instinctively to the hilt of his sword as if he could somehow protect her from the demons of her past. Elena straightened her shoulders and resumed walking, but inside her mind was racing. She had returned to Valdoria thinking she would have to face only her dying father and her manipulative stepmother. But if Lord Blackwood was truly in alliance with Cordelia, if he was planning to consolidate power through marriage to her after the king's death, then the stakes were far higher than she had imagined. The secret she carried about Lord Blackwood was dangerous enough to destroy him, but it was also dangerous enough to destroy her if she tried to use it. For 7 years, she had kept silent, protecting not just herself, but others who would be hurt if the truth came to light. Now she would have to decide whether her father's kingdom was worth the terrible cost of revealing what she knew. As they climbed the marble staircase, Elena's hand unconsciously moved to the small locket she wore beneath her simple dress, the only piece of jewelry she had taken with her when she fled, and the only proof she had of the secret that could change everything. Inside that locket was a miniature portrait and a letter, both of which Lord Blackwood would kill to keep hidden. The irony was not lost on her. She had returned to her father's deathbed carrying the very weapon that could save his kingdom, or destroy it completely. The question was whether she had the courage to use it, and whether the cost of justice was worth the price of truth. The corridors of the upper floors were quieter than she remembered, the servants moving with hushed steps and worried expressions. The entire castle seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable moment when King Aldrich would breathe his last, and the kingdom would face an uncertain future. Elena paused outside the heavy oak door that led to her father's chambers, her hand hovering over the brass handle that had been polished to a mirror shine. On the other side of this door lay the man who had given her life, the king who had ruled Valdoria with wisdom and strength for over 3 decades, now reduced to a shadow of his former self by illness and age. "He may not recognize you at first," Marcus warned gently. "The physicians say his mind wanders more each day, but sometimes, in his clearer moments, he speaks of you with such regret. He has never forgiven himself for letting you leave without trying harder to understand what drove you away." Elena's throat constricted. Her father didn't know the real reason she had fled. She had left him a note saying only that she needed to find her own path in the world, that the pressures of royal life had become too much for her to bear. It was partly true, but it was also a lie designed to protect him from a truth that would have broken his heart. She pushed open the door and stepped into the dimly lit chamber. Heavy curtains blocked most of the afternoon sunlight, leaving the room in a perpetual twilight that seemed fitting for a man caught between life and death. The great four-poster bed that had once seemed so imposing to her child's eyes now looked like a cage, trapping its occupant in a prison of failing flesh. King Aldrich lay propped up against a mountain of pillows, his once powerful frame now gaunt and fragile. His hair, which had been silver when she left, was now pure white and thin as gossamer. But his eyes, those sharp blue eyes that had always seemed to see straight through to her soul, those were unchanged, even if they currently stared unseeing at the embroidered canopy above his head. "Father," Elena whispered, moving slowly toward the bed. The king's head turned slightly, his eyes focusing with visible effort. For a long moment he simply stared at her, then King Aldrich's face crumpled, and tears began to stream down his weathered cheeks. "Elena," he breathed, the word barely audible. "My daughter, my little girl. I thought I would die without seeing you again." Elena rushed to his bedside, falling to her knees and taking his frail hands in her own. They felt like paper in her grasp, so different from the strong hands that had lifted her onto his shoulders when she was small, that had taught her to hold a sword and sign royal documents with equal confidence. "I'm here, Papa," she said, using the childhood name she hadn't spoken in years. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." King Aldrich's grip tightened on her hands with surprising strength. "You came back," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Despite everything, despite how I failed you, you came back. You didn't fail me, Papa. You never failed me. But I did." The king's eyes were clearer now, more focused than they had been when she first entered. "I let her poison your mind against me. I let her drive you away with her jealousy and her schemes. I was so blinded by loneliness after your mother died that I couldn't see what Cordelia truly was until it was too late." Elena's heart clenched. "Papa, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do." King Aldrich struggled to sit up straighter, and Elena helped him, adjusting his pillows. "I need to tell you everything before it's too late. I need you to understand why you must not let her take the throne, why you must not let her and that snake Blackwood destroy everything your mother and I built." The mention of Lord Blackwood sent ice through Elena's veins. "What do you know about Lord Blackwood?" King Aldrich's expression darkened. "More than I wish I did. I may be dying, my dear daughter, but I am not yet dead. I have ears throughout this castle, loyal servants who tell me things they think I need to know. I know about the private meetings, the promises of marriage, the plans they've made for after my death. Then why haven't you stopped them?" Her father's laugh was bitter and weak. "Because I'm a dying old man whose word carries less weight each day. Because half the court believes I'm already mad, and the other half is too afraid of Cordelia's influence to oppose her openly. Because without proof of their treachery, any action I take against them will be seen as the paranoid ravings of a sick king. But I'm here now," Elena said, squeezing his hands. "I'm the rightful heir. I can say." "You can what?" King Aldrich asked gently. "Fight them with what army? Challenge them with whose support? My dear child, you have been gone for 7 years. The nobles who might have supported your claim have either been won over by Cordelia's charm and Blackwood's gold, or they have died and been replaced by younger men who owe their positions to your stepmother's influence." Elena felt a crushing weight settle on her chest. "Then why did you want me to come back? If the situation is hopeless, why—" "Because it's not hopeless," her father interrupted, his voice gaining strength from somewhere deep within his failing body. "Because you have something they don't know about, something that could change everything, if you're brave enough to use it." Elena's blood turned to ice in her veins. "What are you talking about?" King Aldrich's eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that reminded her powerfully of the man he had been in his prime. "I'm talking about the real reason you left 7 years ago. I'm talking about what you discovered about Lord Blackwood that night, the secret you've been carrying all these years." Elena jerked backward as if she'd been struck. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Her father's voice was gentle but implacable. "You think you hid it well, but I knew something terrible had happened that night. I found you in the library, remember? Pale as death, trembling like a leaf in a storm. You told me you had seen something you shouldn't have, and when I pressed you for details, you ran. The next morning, you were gone. Tears began to stream down Elena's face as the carefully constructed walls she had built around that terrible night began to crumble. Papa, I can't. You don't understand what it would cost. I understand more than you think. King Aldrich reached up with one trembling hand to cup her cheek, wiping away her tears with his thumb. I've spent 7 years piecing together what you saw, following threads and whispers and half-heard conversations. I know about the letters, Elena. I know about the treason. Elena's world tilted on its axis. If her father knew, if he had always known, then why, she whispered. Why didn't you act? Why did you let him stay at court? Let him gain more power? Let him ally himself with Cordelia? King Aldrich's expression grew infinitely sad. Because I am a coward, my daughter. Because the truth would have destroyed innocent people along with the guilty. Because I hoped that if I ignored it long enough, it would somehow resolve itself without me having to make the terrible choice between justice and mercy. Elena understood then, understood the impossible position her father had been in, the same position she had been in for 7 years. The secret she carried about Lord Blackwood wasn't just about his treachery. It was about the people who would be hurt if that treachery came to light, innocent people who didn't deserve to pay for his crimes. But now I'm dying, King Aldrich continued. And I no longer have the luxury of cowardice. If Cordelia and Blackwood take control of this kingdom, they will destroy it from within. They will sell our sovereignty to the highest bidder, strip our treasury bare, and leave our people to suffer under their greed and ambition. So what do you want me to do? I want you to be braver than I was. I want you to use what you know to save this kingdom, even if the cost is higher than you want to pay. I want you to be the queen I always knew you could be. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the crown she had never worn settling on her head like a physical thing. When she opened them again, her father was watching her with an expression of such love and pride that it took her breath away. There's something else you need to know, King Aldrich said. Something that might make your decision easier. Marcus, the guard who brought you here, he's been investigating Blackwood's activities on my orders for the past 3 years. He has evidence, Elena. Letters, financial records, testimony from witnesses. But it's not enough on its own. We need what you have, the final piece of the puzzle, to make our case unassailable. Elena's heart began to pound. Marcus knows? About what I saw? He knows some of it. I've been careful not to tell him everything, to protect both of you. But if you decide to act, if you decide to use what you know to bring Blackwood down, he will be your strongest ally. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Marcus himself stepped into the room. His expression was grave, and Elena could see bad news written in every line of his body. Your Majesty, he said, bowing to the king. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Lord Blackwood has arrived earlier than expected. He's currently in the Great Hall with Lady Cordelia, and they're asking to see you. They say it's a matter of urgent importance regarding the succession. King Aldrich's jaw tightened. So soon. I had hoped we would have more time. There's more, Marcus continued reluctantly. They've brought a document with them, a proposed amendment to the succession laws that would require the heir to be present and in good standing with the court for a period of 1 year before they could inherit the throne. If it's ratified by the noble council, it would effectively bar Princess Elena from her inheritance. Elena felt the trap closing around her. They had planned this carefully, timing Blackwood's arrival to coincide with her return, using her 7-year absence as a weapon against her claim to the throne. In one stroke, they would make her exile seem like abandonment and use it to justify stripping away her birthright. How long before they can call the noble council to vote on this? Elena asked. 3 days by law, Marcus replied. But given your father's condition, they'll argue for emergency provisions. They could have a vote as early as tomorrow night. Elena looked at her father, saw the defeat beginning to creep into his eyes, and felt something crystallize inside her chest. For 7 years, she had run from the truth, hidden from the responsibility that came with her birth and her knowledge. But running had solved nothing. The kingdom she loved was still in danger, the people she was born to serve were still under threat, and the secret she carried was still the key to everything. She thought of the locket hanging around her neck, of the letter and portrait hidden within it, of the night 7 years ago when she had stumbled upon Lord Blackwood's greatest weakness. She thought of the innocent people who would be hurt if she revealed what she knew, weighed their pain against the suffering of an entire kingdom. "Papa," she said finally, her voice steady with newfound resolve, "tell me exactly what Marcus has found. Tell me everything you know about Blackwood's plans." And then she paused, reaching under her dress to pull out the small golden locket that had hung over her heart for 7 years. "Then I'll tell you both what really happened that night, and we'll decide together how to save this kingdom." King Aldrich's eyes filled with tears of relief and pride. "My brave daughter," he whispered, "my true heir. I knew you would find your courage when it mattered most." But as Elena prepared to open the locket and reveal the secret that had driven her into exile, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to set in motion events that would change not just the kingdom of Valdoria, but the lives of everyone she had ever loved. The question was whether she was strong enough to bear the consequences of the truth, and whether the price of justice was worth the cost of victory. Outside the king's chamber, the afternoon sun was setting, painting the castle walls in shades of gold and crimson. Soon it would be night, and in the darkness, the real battle for the soul of Valdoria would begin. Elena's hands trembled as she unfastened the delicate clasp of the locket, her fingers moving with the careful precision of someone who had performed this action countless times, in private moments, over the past 7 years. The tiny golden case opened with a soft click that seemed to echo in the hushed chamber like a gunshot. Inside, nestled against black velvet, lay a miniature portrait, no larger than a coin, and a folded piece of parchment so thin it was nearly transparent. King Aldrich leaned forward despite his weakness, his eyes widening as he recognized the face in the portrait. Marcus moved closer, his hand instinctively resting on his sword hilt, as if the small objects posed a physical threat. "Lady Isabella Thorne," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of carefully guarded pain. "Marcus's younger sister, who disappeared 8 years ago. The woman the entire kingdom believes ran away with a traveling merchant to escape an unwanted marriage arrangement." Marcus went rigid, the color draining from his weathered face. "Elena, what are you saying? Isabella is dead to me. She abandoned her family, her duty, her honor." "She's dead, Marcus," Elena interrupted, her voice gentle but implacable. "She has been dead for 8 years, and Lord Blackwood killed her." The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear the distant sound of horses in the courtyard below, probably Blackwood's retinue arriving in their full splendor. The man himself was somewhere in the castle now, presenting his false face to the court, while the evidence of his greatest crime lay open in her palm. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "There were witnesses who saw her leave with the merchant. There were letters, forged letters," Elena said, unfolding the parchment with infinite care. "Written by Blackwood himself, in Isabella's hand. He was quite skilled at forgery, as it turns out. It was one of his many hidden talents, it was called." She held out the letter and Marcus took it with shaking hands. As he read, Elena watched 7 years of carefully constructed beliefs crumble in his eyes, replaced by a grief so raw it was painful to witness. "But how?" King Aldrich asked, his voice barely audible. "How did you come to have this? How did you discover the truth?" Elena closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink back into that terrible night 7 years ago, the night that had shattered her world and sent her fleeing from everything she had ever known. "I couldn't sleep," she began, her voice taking on the distant quality of someone lost in memory. "I had been having nightmares again about Mother's death, and I decided to go to the library to find something to read. You know how I always loved the old histories, the stories of queens who ruled with wisdom and strength." She paused, gathering her courage. This was the first time she had spoken these words aloud to anyone, the first time she had allowed herself to fully remember what she had witnessed. "When I reached the library, I heard voices coming from the small study chamber behind the main room. I thought perhaps one of the scholars was working late, or maybe a servant was cleaning. But as I got closer, I recognized Lord Blackwood's voice, and he was speaking to someone in hushed, urgent tones." Elena opened her eyes, focusing on her father's face to anchor herself in the present. "I should have left then," I should have minded my own business and gone back to my chambers, but something in his tone made me pause, made me listen. He was angry, furious in a way I had never heard him before. What was he saying? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. He was arguing with someone about money, about payments that were overdue. He kept mentioning the arrangement and how it was supposed to have been completed months ago. At first, I thought it was just some boring financial matter, but then Elena's voice caught, and she had to force herself to continue. Then he said Isabella's name. Marcus's hands clenched into fists, the letter crinkling in his grip. What did he say about my sister? He was angry that the merchant hadn't taken her far enough away, that people were still asking questions about her disappearance. He said the story was supposed to end the questions, not create more of them. And then the other person laughed. Elena's blood ran cold even now, remembering that sound. It had been high and musical and utterly without warmth, like silver bells filled with poison. It was Lady Cordelia, she continued, seeing the shock register on both men's faces. She was there with him, and she was laughing about your sister, Marcus. She said Isabella had been far too curious for her own good, always asking questions about the financial records, always poking around in matters that didn't concern her. The pieces were falling into place now. The truth that Elena had been too young and too naive to fully understand 7 years ago finally becoming clear in the telling. Isabella discovered something, didn't she? King Aldrich asked, his political instincts still sharp despite his physical weakness. She found evidence of their embezzlement. Elena nodded grimly. More than that, she found evidence that they had been selling state secrets to Valdoria's enemies, using the information to manipulate trade agreements and military contracts. Isabella had been working in the Treasury office that summer, helping with the annual audit. She was always so good with numbers, so careful with details. She must have noticed discrepancies, followed the trail of false transactions. So they killed her to keep her quiet, Marcus said, his voice flat with grief and rage. Not immediately, Elena replied, and her next words came out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly might lessen their horror. From what I overheard, they tried to buy her silence first. When that failed, they tried to discredit her, to make people think she was unstable or dishonest. But Isabella was too well respected, too obviously honest. So they decided to make her disappear in a way that would ruin her reputation and prevent anyone from looking too deeply into her claims. Elena took a shuddering breath before continuing. They arranged for her to meet with someone she thought was going to help her expose their crimes. Instead, Blackwood was waiting for her. He killed her that night, made it look like she had run away with the merchant who was supposed to be her contact. The merchant himself was probably dead within days. No witnesses, no loose ends. But how did you get these? King Aldrich gestured weakly toward the locket's contents. I was so horrified by what I was hearing that I wasn't paying attention to where I was standing. I bumped into a chair, knocked over a small table. They heard the noise and started moving toward the sound. I panicked and ran, but not before I saw Blackwood opening a small wooden box on his desk. Inside were Isabella's personal effects, things he had taken from her body as trophies. Elena's voice broke, and tears began streaming down her face as she relived the terror of that night. I hid behind one of the great bookcases, praying they wouldn't find me. Blackwood searched the area where the noise had come from, but the library is so vast, with so many shadowy corners. While he was searching, Cordelia was examining the contents of the box. She picked up the locket and opened it, laughing at the portrait inside. She knew, Marcus said, the words torn from his throat like a physical wound. She knew what they had done to Isabella, and she laughed. She said Isabella had been a pretty little thing, too pretty and too smart for her own good. She said it was almost a pity that such beauty had to be wasted, but that some sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. And then, Elena paused, steeling herself for the worst part of the story. Then Blackwood came back, and Cordelia tossed in the locket carelessly like it was worthless trash. But her throw was wild, and it flew past him, landing right at my feet behind the bookcase. I grabbed it and held my breath. Certain they would see me, certain I would join Isabella in whatever grave they had prepared for her. But they didn't find you, King Aldrich said. No, they were too focused on their conversation, too confident in their secrecy. They spent another few minutes discussing how to handle some questions the noble council had been asking about treasury discrepancies, how to redirect suspicion toward other targets. Then they left, and I was alone with the truth and the evidence that could destroy them both. Elena wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to regain her composure. I knew I should go straight to you, Papa, should tell you everything I had heard and seen, but I was terrified. I was 19 years old, and I had just learned that my stepmother was a murderer, and that one of your most trusted advisors was a traitor. I didn't know who else might be involved, who else I could trust. So you ran, Marcus said, but there was no condemnation in his voice, only understanding. I ran like a coward, Elena confirmed bitterly. I told myself I was being strategic, that I needed time to figure out how to safely reveal what I knew. But the truth is, I was just scared. I was scared they would kill me like they killed Isabella, scared that no one would believe me, scared that even if they did believe me, the scandal would destroy the kingdom. King Aldrich reached out and took his daughter's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. You were not a coward, my dear child. You were wise to be afraid. If you had stayed, if you had tried to expose them then, they would indeed have killed you. You were young and alone, with no allies and no proof beyond your word against theirs. But I had this, Elena protested, holding up the locket. I had Isabella's portrait and Blackwood's own letter written in his hand. A letter that could have been dismissed as a forgery, Marcus pointed out, his voice gentle despite the pain in his eyes. A portrait that proved nothing by itself. Without witnesses, without additional evidence, it would have been your word against two of the most powerful people in the kingdom. Elena knew he was right, had known it even then, but the guilt of her flight had eaten at her for 7 long years. She had convinced herself that her cowardice had condemned Isabella's memory to dishonor, and left her father vulnerable to his enemy's machinations. What I don't understand, King Aldrich said thoughtfully, is why they kept the evidence at all. Why didn't Blackwood destroy Isabella's personal effects immediately after her death? Elena's expression darkened. Because he's a monster who enjoys his victories. When I was hiding behind that bookcase, I saw him open another box, smaller than the first. Inside were trophies. Jewelry, locks of hair, small personal items. Isabella wasn't his first victim, Papa. She was just the most recent. The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence, poisoning the very atmosphere of the room. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal, and King Aldrich closed his eyes as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to bear. How many? The king asked eventually. I don't know for certain, but from what I glimpsed, at least 6 items from different women. Some of them looked very old, as if they had been collected over many years. Dear God, King Aldrich whispered. I brought a serial killer into my court, gave him power and influence, trusted him with state secrets. How many innocent people died because of my blindness? You couldn't have known, Elena said firmly. Blackwood is skilled at deception, at presenting exactly the face people expect to see. Even if you had suspected, even if you had investigated, he would have covered his tracks too well for casual discovery. But now we know, Marcus said, his voice taking on a hard, determined edge. Now we have proof, and we have witnesses. The bastard won't escape justice this time. It's not that simple, Elena warned. Yes, we have evidence of Isabella's murder, but proving the larger conspiracy will be much more difficult, and if we move too quickly, too openly, Cordelia and Blackwood will have time to destroy whatever additional evidence exists and eliminate any witnesses who might support our claims. King Aldrich struggled to sit up straighter, his eyes taking on some of their old fire. Then we need to be smarter than they are. We need to outmaneuver them, use their own arrogance and overconfidence against them. What do you have in mind? Elena asked, recognizing the tactical mind that had made her father such an effective ruler. First, we need to secure Marcus's evidence. Make sure it's safely hidden where Cordelia and Blackwood can't find it or destroy it. Second, we need to identify any remaining loyal members of the noble council, people who can be trusted to act in the kingdom's best interests when the time comes. That won't be easy, Marcus warned. Cordelia has been very thorough in her campaign to win allies and eliminate opposition. Many of the old guard have died or retired, and their replacements owe their positions to her influence. But not all of them. King Aldrich said with certainty. Lord Garrett remains loyal, I'm sure of it. And Lady Pemberton, despite her advanced age, still commands respect among the traditional families. If we can convince them to support Elena's claim, they might be able to sway others when the vote comes. Elena felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly tempered by practical concerns. Even if we can secure some support on the council, we still have the problem of timing. They're planning to vote tomorrow night on that amendment to the succession laws. If it passes, it won't matter how much evidence we have or how many allies we can gather. Then we need to make our move before the vote, Marcus said. We need to present our evidence publicly, force them to defend themselves against charges of murder and treason. That's exactly what they expect us to do. They're counting on us to act rashly, to present our case before we're fully prepared. If we accuse them publicly and fail to make our charges stick, they'll be able to dismiss everything as desperate lies from a disgraced princess trying to reclaim her throne. King Aldrich nodded approvingly. My daughter has learned wisdom in her travels, so what do you propose? Elena stood and began pacing, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. 7 years of surviving in the world beyond the castle walls had taught her to think strategically, to plan for multiple outcomes, and prepare for the unexpected. We need to divide them, she said finally. Cordelia and Blackwood are allied now, but that alliance is built on mutual benefit, not genuine trust or affection. If we can drive a wedge between them, make them turn on each other, we might be able to use their conflict to our advantage. How do we do that? Marcus asked. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. By giving them something more valuable than their alliance, the chance to save themselves by betraying the other. She moved to the window, looking out at the courtyard where torches were being lit against the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the castle below, Cordelia and Blackwood were probably celebrating their anticipated victory, confident that they had planned for every contingency. They had no idea that the frightened girl who had fled 7 years ago had returned as a woman capable of matching them move for move. Here's what we're going to do, Elena said, turning back to face her father and Marcus. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to request a private audience with Lord Blackwood. I'll tell him that I know he and Cordelia have been working together, but that I'm willing to make a deal. What kind of deal? King Aldrich asked warily. I'll offer to step aside, to formally renounce my claim to the throne in exchange for a generous settlement and safe passage out of the kingdom. I'll make it seem like I'm the same frightened girl who ran away 7 years ago, too weak and cowardly to fight for what's rightfully mine. Marcus looked horrified. Elena, you can't be serious. You're the rightful heir. I'm not actually going to renounce my claim, Elena interrupted. I'm going to make Blackwood think I will, while secretly recording our conversation. With any luck, his arrogance will lead him to boast about his plans, maybe even let slip details about Isabella's murder or their other crimes. And what about Cordelia? King Aldrich asked. That afternoon, I'll have a similar conversation with her, but with a different angle. I'll tell her that Blackwood has been trying to convince me to ally with him against her, that he's been spreading rumors about her competence and fitness to rule. I'll suggest that perhaps she and I should work together instead, as women who understand the challenges of wielding power in a man's world. Elena's plan was audacious, requiring perfect timing and no small amount of acting ability, but it had the virtue of using her enemy's own assumptions against them. If I can get them both on record discussing their crimes, and if I can make them suspicious of each other's loyalty, they'll be weakened when we finally present our evidence to the noble council. Instead of presenting a united front, they'll be watching each other for signs of betrayal. It's dangerous, Marcus said. If either of them suspects what you're really doing, then I'll be in the same position I was 7 years ago, Elena finished calmly. Except this time, I won't run. This time, I'll fight. King Aldrich studied his daughter's face, seeing in it the determination and strength he had always hoped she would develop. You've grown into the queen this kingdom needs, he said softly. Your mother would be proud. The mention of her mother brought fresh tears to Elena's eyes, but they were tears of resolution rather than grief. Queen Isabella had been a woman of great courage and wisdom, beloved by the people and respected by the nobility. If Elena was to save her father's kingdom, she would need to channel her mother's strength. There's one more thing, Elena said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. If this plan works, if we're able to expose Cordelia and Blackwood's crimes and secure my claim to the throne, there will still be the question of what to do with the evidence of Isabella's murder.
What do you mean?
I mean that revealing the truth about Isabella will clear her name and bring justice for her death, but it will also destroy the lives of innocent people who had nothing to do with her murder.
Isabella's supposed elopement was a scandal, but at least it allowed people to believe she had chosen her own path.
Learning that she was murdered by a man they trusted, while the woman they've been respecting as their future queen laughed about it. Elena trailed off, but her meaning was clear. The truth would shatter the faith of many in the royal court, would make them question every relationship and every alliance they had formed over the past 8 years. Some might never recover from the betrayal of their trust. Justice isn't always clean, Marcus said quietly. Sometimes innocent people get hurt when guilty people are brought to account, but that doesn't mean we should let the guilty escape punishment. I know, Elena replied. And I'm not suggesting we should. I'm just saying that we need to be prepared for the consequences of our actions, for the damage that the truth might cause to people who don't deserve it. King Aldrich reached for his daughter's hand again. Elena, you cannot protect everyone from the pain of truth. All you can do is ensure that the truth serves justice and protects the innocent as much as possible. Your duty is to the kingdom and its people, not to preserving comfortable illusions. Elena nodded, knowing he was right, but still feeling the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle of lead. Tomorrow she would begin the most dangerous game of her life, matching wits with 2 people who had already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. If she failed, she would almost certainly die. If she succeeded, she would save the kingdom but shatter the lives of people she cared about. We should get some rest, she said finally. Tomorrow will be a long day, and we'll need all our strength for what's to come. Marcus bowed formally. Your Highness, I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the cost, I will stand with you. Isabella's death has gone unavenged for too long, and the kingdom's future is more important than my personal pain. Thank you, Marcus. Your loyalty means more to me than you know. As the guard left to make his preparations for the coming confrontation, Elena remained with her father, helping him settle back against his pillows as the night deepened around them. Papa, she said softly, what if I'm wrong? What if this plan fails and I end up making everything worse? King Aldrich smiled, his weathered face crinkling with affection and pride. Then you will have failed while fighting for what's right, which is far more honorable than succeeding through cowardice or deceit. But I don't think you'll fail, my dear daughter. You have your mother's wisdom and your own hard-won strength. Tomorrow you'll prove to the kingdom and to yourself that you are truly worthy of the crown that awaits you. Elena kissed her father's forehead, tasting the salt of her own tears on her lips. I love you, Papa. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that I love you, and I'm grateful for everything you've taught me. I love you too, my brave girl. Now go. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you reclaim your birthright and save your people. As Elena made her way through the darkened corridors to her childhood chambers, she felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her with each step. Behind her lay 7 years of exile and regret. Ahead lay a confrontation that would determine not just her own fate, but the future of everyone in the kingdom she had been born to rule. The locket hung heavy around her neck, Isabella's portrait and Blackwood's letter burning against her skin like brands of fire. Soon, very soon, the dead would speak again, and their voices would either condemn the guilty or destroy the innocent. Elena only hoped she had the strength to control which outcome prevailed. Dawn broke over the castle of Valdoria with an ominous crimson hue, as if the very sky knew that this day would be written in blood and betrayal. Elena stood at the window of her childhood chamber, watching the sun climb above the eastern towers while her mind rehearsed every detail of the deadly game she was about to play. In a few hours, she would sit across from Lord Blackwood and look into the eyes of the man who had murdered Isabella Thorne, pretending to be the same broken girl who had fled into exile 7 years ago. Her hands were steady as she fastened the locket around her neck, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Inside the tiny golden case lay not just evidence of Blackwood's crimes, but the weight of justice for all his victims. Today, that weight would either crush her or give her the strength to reclaim her throne. A soft knock at the door interrupted her preparations. "Come in," she called, turning from the window with practiced composure. Marcus entered, his usually immaculate uniform showing signs of a sleepless night. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his expression was resolute. In his hand he carried a small mechanical device that Elena didn't recognize. "Good morning, Your Highness. I've brought something that might help with today's conversations." He held up the device, which appeared to be an intricate arrangement of gears, springs, and tiny silver tubes. It's a recording mechanism, designed by the Royal Engineers for documenting important state meetings. If you can get close enough to either Blackwood or Lady Cordelia while they're speaking, this device will capture their words with perfect clarity. Elena examined the mechanism with interest. It was smaller than she had expected, easily concealed within the folds of a dress or the pages of a book. "How does it work?" "You activate it by pressing this hidden switch," Marcus demonstrated, pointing to an almost invisible lever disguised as part of the device's decorative scrollwork. "It will record for approximately 1 hour before needing to be rewound. The voice reproduction is remarkably clear enough to be used as evidence before the Noble Council." "Excellent. This will make our task much easier." Elena carefully secreted the device in a hidden pocket sewn into her gown, a trick she had learned during her years of exile when carrying concealed weapons had often meant the difference between life and death. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his expression growing darker. "I received word from my contacts in the servants' quarters. Lord Blackwood was seen entering Lady Cordelia's chambers very late last night, and he didn't emerge until well after midnight. They're planning something, Your Highness. Something that requires absolute coordination between them." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Do we know what they discussed?" "No, but I suspect they're preparing for the possibility that you might not be as compliant as they hope. Blackwood brought additional guards with him, mercenaries, not castle staff. They're positioned throughout the building in seemingly innocent roles, but I recognize the type. These are men who kill for coin, not loyalty." The news was troubling, but not entirely unexpected. Elena had always known that this confrontation would be dangerous, that Blackwood and Cordelia wouldn't hesitate to eliminate her if they perceived her as a genuine threat to their plans. "How many?" she asked. "At least a dozen, possibly more. They're disguised as servants, merchants, and visiting dignitaries, but they all have the same look about them, the predatory alertness of professional killers." Elena nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to be even more careful than planned. Is there any way to get word to Lord Garrett and Lady Pemberton without arousing suspicion?" "Already done. I sent messages last night through channels that Cordelia doesn't monitor. Both have agreed to attend the emergency session of the Noble Council tonight, and both are prepared to support your claim if you can provide the evidence you've promised." "Good. Then everything is in place." Elena moved to her dressing table and began arranging her hair in the elaborate style befitting her royal station. The familiar ritual helped calm her nerves, reminding her of the countless mornings in her youth when she had prepared for court functions and state ceremonies. "Your Highness," Marcus said hesitantly, "there's something else you should know about my sister, about Isabella." His voice caught on her name, and Elena could see the pain still raw in his weathered features. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about what you told us last night, about the other victims, the trophies Blackwood keeps. If we're successful today, if we manage to bring him down, I want to search his quarters. I want to find out who the other women were, give their families the closure they deserve." Elena's heart went out to him. The discovery that his sister had been murdered rather than disgraced had reopened wounds that had never properly healed, but it had also given him a purpose that went beyond simple revenge. "When this is over," she promised, "we'll find them all. We'll make sure their names are remembered and their deaths avenged. Isabella won't be the only one to receive justice." Marcus bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Highness. That means more to me than you know." After Marcus left to make his final preparations, Elena spent several minutes in meditation, a practice she had learned during her exile from an old monk who had taught her to find inner peace even in the midst of chaos. She would need that peace today, would need to project calm confidence even as she played the most dangerous game of her life. At precisely 10 o'clock, a servant arrived to escort her to the blue salon, where Lord Blackwood awaited her. Elena followed the girl through corridors that seemed both familiar and foreign, changed by 7 years of absence and colored by her new understanding of the corruption that had festered within these walls. Lord Blackwood stood with his back to the door when she entered, gazing out at the gardens where Isabella Thorne had once walked, unaware that her killer now enjoyed the view she would never see again. He was a handsome man in his late 40s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of aristocratic features that inspired confidence in those who didn't know his true nature. When he turned to greet her, his smile was warm and welcoming, the perfect mask of a concerned family friend. "Princess Elena," he said, bowing with precisely the correct degree of deference. "How wonderful to see you again after all these years. You've grown into a truly remarkable woman."
"A Lord Blackwood,"
Elena replied, keeping her voice carefully neutral.
"Thank you for agreeing to meet with me privately."
"I hope you'll understand that my return to court is complicated by certain circumstances." Of course. Please. Sit down." He gestured to a pair of chairs arranged near the fireplace, positioned so that they would be speaking face to face but with enough distance between them to maintain propriety. Elena noticed that his chair was placed with its back to the light, while hers faced the window, a subtle psychological advantage that would make it harder for her to read his expressions. Elena activated the recording device as she settled into her seat, the tiny click masked by the rustling of her skirts. "I suppose you know why I've requested this meeting." "I imagine it has something to do with the challenges facing your claim to the throne," Blackwood said smoothly. "Your father's illness has created a difficult situation for everyone involved. The kingdom needs stable leadership, and your 7-year absence has raised questions about your readiness to assume the crown. Questions that you and Lady Cordelia have been working very hard to encourage," Elena replied, allowing a hint of bitterness to creep into her voice. Blackwood's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his pale eyes. "My dear princess, I hope you don't think that Lady Cordelia and I have been plotting against you. We're simply concerned about the kingdom's welfare. Your sudden departure 7 years ago left many people wondering about your stability, your commitment to your duties. And I suppose the amendment to the succession laws that you've proposed to the noble council is also motivated purely by concern for the kingdom's welfare? Naturally, we need to ensure that whoever inherits the throne is truly prepared for the responsibility. A year of demonstrated commitment seems like a reasonable requirement, don't you think?" Elena leaned forward slightly as if sharing a confidence. "Lord Blackwood, let me be frank with you. We both know that this amendment is designed to prevent me from taking the throne. What I want to know is, what would it take for you to withdraw your support for it?" Blackwood's eyebrows rose in apparent surprise. "My dear princess, I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting that perhaps we can come to some sort of arrangement. You and Lady Cordelia clearly have plans for this kingdom's future, plans that don't include me wearing the crown. I'm willing to discuss alternatives that might serve everyone's interests." The bait was cast. Now Elena waited to see if Blackwood's arrogance would lead him to take it. "What sort of alternatives?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes sharp with interest. "I could formally renounce my claim to the throne," Elena said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth, "in exchange for certain considerations, a generous settlement, safe passage to wherever I choose to live, perhaps a small estate in a neighboring kingdom, where I could live quietly, without causing any further embarrassment to the royal family." Blackwood sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he considered her proposal. Elena could almost see the calculations running through his mind, weighing the benefits of her voluntary abdication against the risks of whatever plan he and Cordelia had originally devised. "That's a very mature perspective, Princess. But I have to ask, why now? Why come forward with this offer instead of fighting for what you believe is rightfully yours?" This was the crucial moment. Elena allowed her composure to crack slightly, letting fear and vulnerability show in her expression.
"Because I'm tired, Lord Blackwood."
"I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that I'm strong enough to rule a kingdom when I couldn't even handle the pressures of court life as a teenager. You fled rather suddenly 7 years ago." Blackwood observed, his voice taking on a predatory quality. There were rumors at the time about what might have driven you away so precipitously. Elena's pulse quickened. He was fishing, trying to determine how much she really knew about the events surrounding her departure. I was young and foolish, she said carefully. I let the pressures of court life overwhelm me, let myself imagine threats and conspiracies where none existed. I convinced myself that I had stumbled onto some sort of terrible secret, but in retrospect, I think I was just having some sort of nervous breakdown. What kind of secret? Blackwood asked, leaning forward with apparent concern. Perhaps talking about it now might help you put those fears to rest. Elena took a deep breath as if steeling herself to reveal a painful memory. I thought I had overheard you and Lady Cordelia discussing, I don't know, some sort of plot against my father. But I realize now that I must have misunderstood what I was hearing, probably taken innocent conversations out of context and built them up in my mind into something sinister. Blackwood's smile widened, and for a moment, Elena caught a glimpse of the monster beneath the mask. He thought she was broken, defeated, no longer a threat to his plans. My dear princess, you were indeed very young and under tremendous pressure. It's understandable that you might have misinterpreted perfectly innocent discussions about kingdom business. Lady Cordelia and I have always worked closely with your father on matters of state. It's quite natural that you might have overheard conversations that seemed mysterious to someone not familiar with the complexities of governance. So you don't think I'm a threat to the stability of the kingdom? Elena asked, allowing hope to creep into her voice. Not at all. In fact, I think your willingness to step aside shows a wisdom and maturity that many people didn't expect from you. The kingdom needs leaders who put its welfare above their personal ambitions. Elena could barely contain her disgust at his patronizing tone, but she forced herself to continue the charade. Then you would support my request for a generous settlement? Something that would allow me to live comfortably while removing any questions about the succession? I think such an arrangement could be very beneficial for everyone involved, Blackwood agreed. Of course, the details would need to be worked out carefully. We wouldn't want any complications to arise later. What kind of complications? Blackwood's eyes grew cold. Well, for instance, if you were to change your mind about your abdication after receiving your settlement, or if you were to remember additional details about those conversations you overheard 7 years ago. Such complications could be very unfortunate for everyone involved. The threat was barely veiled, but it was enough to confirm what Elena already knew, that Blackwood was prepared to kill her if she posed any real danger to his plans. I understand completely, she said, infusing her voice with just the right amount of fear. I have no desire to create complications for anyone. I just want to live peacefully and anonymously, without the burden of royal expectations. Excellent. Then I think we can work something out. I'll need to discuss the specifics with Lady Cordelia, of course, but I'm confident she'll see the wisdom in this approach. Elena rose from her chair as if preparing to leave. Thank you, Lord Blackwood. I'm so relieved that we could reach an understanding. I've been dreading this conversation for days, imagining all sorts of terrible outcomes. There's no need for dread, my dear princess. We're all civilized people here, working toward the same goal of a stable, prosperous kingdom. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions, but I'm sure you understand. As Elena moved toward the door, Blackwood's voice stopped her. Princess, there is one small matter I should mention, the settlement we discussed. It would, of course, be contingent on your complete discretion about all matters relating to the royal court, both past and present. Any indiscretions on your part would naturally void the agreement. Elena turned back, her expression perfectly innocent. Of course, I would never do anything to embarrass the royal family or endanger the kingdom's interests. I'm so glad we understand each other. Oh, and Princess? His smile was sharp as a blade. I do hope you'll consider attending tonight's Noble Council session. It would be a shame if the members didn't have the opportunity to hear your perspective on the succession question before they vote. The invitation was clearly a trap, an opportunity for Blackwood and Cordelia to publicly humiliate her by forcing her to announce her abdication in front of the assembled nobility. But Elena simply smiled and nodded. I'll certainly consider it, Lord Blackwood. Thank you for the suggestion. As she left the blue salon, Elena felt the weight of the recording device against her ribs like a talisman. Blackwood's threats had been subtle but clear. and his confidence in her defeat had led him to say more than he probably intended. When the noble council heard his words tonight, they would understand exactly what kind of man they had been trusting with their kingdom's future. But first, she had another performance to give. Lady Cordelia received her in the rose garden, a setting that seemed calculated to emphasize the contrast between her stepmother's cultivated beauty and Elena's travel-worn appearance. Cordelia wore a gown of pale pink silk that complemented her golden hair and green eyes, while Elena had deliberately chosen a simple blue dress that made her look younger and less threatening. "My dear Elena," Cordelia said, rising from the wrought iron bench where she had been pretending to read. "How lovely to see you looking so much better than you did yesterday. I was quite concerned about you. You looked positively haggard when you arrived." "Thank you for your concern, Lady Cordelia. I admit that the journey was more difficult than I expected, and seeing Father in such a weakened state was challenging. Yes, it must be quite a shock for someone who has been away for so long. Your father's condition has deteriorated significantly over the past few months. I'm afraid his mind wanders quite frequently now, especially when he becomes emotional or upset." Elena caught the implication immediately. Any claims her father might make about Cordelia's activities could be dismissed as the ravings of a sick old man. "That must be very difficult for you, having to manage the kingdom's affairs while caring for an invalid husband." Cordelia's smile was practiced and perfect. "It's been challenging, but it's also been rewarding to know that I'm serving the kingdom in its time of need. Of course, some people have questioned whether a woman should wield so much influence in matters of state, but I've tried to prove myself worthy of the trust your father has placed in me." Elena settled onto the bench beside her stepmother, close enough to ensure that the recording device would capture every word clearly. "I imagine Lord Blackwood has been very helpful in that regard. He always struck me as a man who appreciated competent women. Oh, yes. Lord Blackwood has been absolutely invaluable. He has such a deep understanding of political complexities, and he's been wonderfully supportive of my efforts to maintain stability during your father's illness." "I'm sure he has. In fact, I had a very interesting conversation with him this morning." Cordelia's expression didn't change, but Elena caught a subtle tensing in her posture. "What did you discuss?" "The future, primarily. My future, and the kingdom's future. He seemed to think that perhaps we could find a solution to the current awkwardness surrounding the succession question." "What sort of solution?" Elena allowed uncertainty to color her voice, as if she was still working through the implications of her conversation with Blackwood. "He suggested that perhaps it would be better for everyone if I were to step aside voluntarily, renounce my claim to the throne in exchange for a comfortable retirement somewhere far from court." Cordelia's eyes lit up with what looked like genuine delight. What a thoughtful suggestion. "I'm sure Lord Blackwood was motivated purely by concern for your well-being. The pressures of ruling can be overwhelming, especially for someone who found court life so challenging in their youth. Yes, he mentioned that he remembered my difficulties 7 years ago. He seemed to think that my departure had been motivated by some sort of nervous breakdown. Well, we were all very concerned about you at the time," Cordelia said smoothly. "You seemed so agitated in those final days, making wild claims about overhearing things that couldn't possibly have been real. I remember thinking that perhaps the pressure of your approaching majority and the responsibilities that would come with it had simply become too much for your young mind to handle." Yelena leaned forward confidentially. "Cordelia, can I ask you something? Woman to woman?" "Of course, dear. Do you really think I'm unfit to rule? I mean, I know I was unstable as a teenager, but I've grown a great deal during my time away. I've learned to be strong, to make difficult decisions, to handle responsibilities that would have overwhelmed me 7 years ago." Cordelia reached over and patted Elena's hand with false maternal affection. "Oh, my dear child, I'm sure you've grown tremendously. But ruling a kingdom requires more than personal strength. It requires the trust and respect of the nobility, the support of the military, the confidence of the people. After 7 years of absence, after the unfortunate circumstances of your departure, it would be very difficult for you to command that kind of authority. But if I had evidence that certain people had been working against the crown's interests, people who currently enjoy positions of trust and influence, wouldn't that change things? Wouldn't it prove that I was right to be concerned 7 years ago?" Elena watched carefully as Cordelia processed this statement, saw the calculation and concern that flickered across her beautiful features. "What kind of evidence?" Cordelia asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Oh, I don't have anything specific," Elena said quickly, as if realizing she had said too much. "I just meant hypothetically. If someone had proof of, I don't know, financial irregularities or inappropriate foreign contacts, that sort of thing. Would it matter? Elena?" Cordelia said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "I hope you're not planning to make the same sort of wild accusations that drove you away 7 years ago. That would be very unfortunate for everyone involved." "Of course not. I learned my lesson about making accusations without absolute proof. I'm just trying to understand whether there's any path back to the throne for me, or whether I should accept Lord Blackwood's suggestion and step aside gracefully." Cordelia studied Elena's face for a long moment, clearly trying to determine whether the younger woman posed any real threat to her plans.
"I think," she said finally, "that stepping aside would be the wisest course of action."
"You're still young, Elena. You could have a wonderful life outside of all this political maneuvering and court intrigue. Marriage to a nice nobleman in a distant kingdom, children of your own to love and care for, freedom from the constant scrutiny that comes with royal position." "But what about justice?" Elena asked.